The courtroom was dead silent, except for the low hum of the air conditioning above the judge's bench. My younger brother, Daniel, leaned back in his chair with the kind of smile you see on a man who thinks he's already won. "Enjoy your retirement, Marcus," he said. Without a dime. A few people in the gallery glanced my way. Daniel's attorney was busy shuffling papers, barely paying attention. That was a mistake. I looked at my brother for a long moment. Then I smiled back. "You forgot one thing." His attorney's head snapped up immediately. The confidence in the room shifted, just slightly, but enough. Because the document Daniel had pressured me to sign wasn't what he believed it was. And neither was the inheritance he'd spent the past 8 months celebrating. To explain that, I need to go back to the week our father died. My name is Marcus Carter. I'm 69 years old. I retired from the United States Army after 28 years of service. Infantry, logistics, 2 overseas deployments, and more than a decade managing military supply chains where a single miscalculation could cost lives. I learned precision. I learned patience. And more than anything, I learned that when something looks too clean, you're probably not seeing the whole picture. My father, Raymond Carter, passed away on a cold Tuesday morning in Savannah, Georgia. The call came from Daniel just before 7 a.m. His voice was flat, not grief-stricken, not shaking, just flat. The kind of voice someone uses when they're delivering information rather than processing loss. I sat in my kitchen for a long time after hanging up. Raymond and I had never been close in the way fathers and sons are supposed to be. He was a hard man. Pride was his language. Approval was a currency he rarely spent. I chased it for years. Military service, promotions, commendations. None of it moved him the way I hoped. Daniel figured that out early. He stopped chasing and started staying. Moved nearby, had Sunday dinner with Dad every week, became the son who was always there. I was the one stationed overseas, then transferred, then deployed again. Distance becomes habit faster than you realize. The funeral brought the whole family together. The church was full, old friends, veterans, neighbors who had known my father for 40 years. But something felt wrong from the moment I walked into the reception. Daniel was working the room like a man closing deals. Not grieving, planning. I heard him say it more than once. Everything's already handled. And Dad made sure the paperwork was taken care of. The funeral had ended 3 hours earlier. A week later, Daniel invited me to meet with his attorney, a man named Gerald Watts, quiet office, older building downtown. He explained that our father had organized estate documents before his death and that several forms required both of our signatures to avoid delays in probate. I asked a few questions. Not enough. That's on me. Grief is a weapon against disciplined men. It makes you want things finished, not prolonged. You're exhausted in ways that sleep doesn't fix. The stack of documents was thick, property descriptions, trust references, transfer language. Most of it seemed routine. Daniel sat beside me, occasionally saying, "It's just standard stuff." And I, a man who had reviewed military contract for decades, signed every page without reading deeply enough. For months, nothing seemed wrong. I mowed my lawn, volunteered at a veteran support center on Tuesdays, called Old Army Buddies. Then a certified letter arrived. By the time I finished reading, my coffee had gone cold. According to the estate records, Daniel had received nearly everything. The family home, the lake property, the investment accounts, the rental income, my father's entire financial legacy, legally transferred with my signature attached. I called Daniel immediately. He answered on the second ring. "You finally got the paperwork," he said. Not a question, a statement. "You manipulated me." "No, Marcus. You signed willingly. We both know that." Then, after a pause, Dad trusted me to handle things. That line hit harder than I expected. Not because I believed it, because I'd heard versions of it my entire life. Richard stayed. Richard was reliable. Richard was present. I was always the one who left. I almost reacted the way he expected me to. Lawsuits, press, public accusations. Instead, I made a different choice. I requested copies of every document I had signed. Every page, every attachment, every exhibit. When the package arrived 2 weeks later, I spread it across my dining room table and read through it slowly, line by line, the way I used to review supply chain audits at 11 p.m. before a commander's inspection. And that's when I found it. Buried deep in one transfer agreement, halfway through a section referencing a family trust, was a single paragraph that most people would have skipped entirely. The language was dense, but the meaning was clear. Any beneficiary receiving transferred assets would also assume all obligations, liabilities, guarantees, encumbrances, and financial responsibilities attached to those assets. I sat back and stared at the ceiling. Then I remembered a lunch from about 12 years ago. My father, over grilled fish near the waterfront, had mentioned a failed commercial real estate investment. He'd said something I'd never forgotten. I put everything up as collateral. Everything. I hadn't thought much of it at the time. I started digging. Over the following weeks, I visited the county records office, reviewed public filings, and tracked down a retired accountant named Wallace Briggs who had worked with my father years earlier. Over coffee, Wallace didn't say much. Professional ethics still mattered to him. But the public records told a clear enough story. My father had been leveraging assets for years. Properties pledged as collateral. Business loans restructured rather than repaid. Financial obligations quietly stacked beneath an impressive-looking surface. The estate wasn't a treasure chest. It was a machine with hidden moving parts. And Daniel had inherited every single one of them. By the time the hearing arrived, Daniel's confidence had already started cracking. Contractors had stopped showing up at the lake house. The luxury SUV was still in the driveway, but the renovation plans had gone quiet. Creditors had begun making calls. In the courtroom, Michael Harris, my attorney, a practical man who trusted documents more than speeches, presented the evidence without drama. Property records, loan agreements, personal guarantees bearing my father's signature, now transferred by association to the man who owned those properties. The man who had wanted everything. The judge read the transfer provision twice. Stephen Granger, Daniel's attorney, leaned forward. For the first time that morning, uncertainty replaced confidence. Daniel looked at his attorney. What does that mean? Gerald didn't answer quickly enough. Which was answer enough? The ruling was straightforward. The transfers stood. Every asset remained Daniel's. And so did every obligation attached to those assets. Benefits and burdens. Ownership and responsibility. You can't separate them. After the hearing, I sat in my car for a while before driving home. I hadn't won a fortune. I hadn't recovered an inheritance. What I had done was refuse to be buried by one. And sometimes, that's the only victory that matters. 3 months later, Daniel knocked on my door. He looked older. He sat at my kitchen table and asked one question. Did you know? Before you sign, I told him the truth. No, I found it after. He nodded slowly. Then, I thought if I won the whole thing, I'd finally feel like I mattered. It was the most honest thing he'd ever said to me. Because I understood it completely. We'd spent our whole lives competing inside a story our father wrote for us. Different roles, same wound. The estate is mostly gone now. The property's sold. The debt's settled. What remains is 2 brothers in their late 60s, occasionally having lunch, occasionally telling stories about a family that deserved better choices from all of us. Sometimes the most valuable inheritance isn't listed in any document. It's the moment you finally stop competing, not because you lost, but because you finally understand what you were really fighting for.